My name is Clancy Immisland, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm very glad to be here tonight. I'm really pleased to be here this weekend. I'm out a lot of weekends, different places and conventions and things. But I've really enjoyed this as much as anything I've been to for a long, long time, because it really is the essence of AA. I think sometimes this essence gets lost in the scramble of people and personalities and conflicting beliefs. And I've really enjoyed being here. I felt kind of sad last night when Patty was talking, and she mentioned that Don hadn't taken her to dinner, and she really felt pretty bad about that. I took him to dinner, and I took a couple other guys to dinner, and it cost me $60. You can have the treat next time, Patty. But I felt a little bad about those. Later in the evening, I really went into a smit because Patty brought her husband, and the committee didn't furnish me a temporary wife, I'll tell you. It's very lonely with the all-night show there, and but at my age, I have my memories. It's kind of a funny thing. I don't know if I maybe think about this, but years ago in World War II, I guess I didn't find out about it until later, but they used to put a lot of saltpeter in our food in the Navy because you have to be a ship somewhere, and they give you a lot of saltpeter, which is supposed to diminish your sexual drive so you won't find yourself eyeing the mess men, and hey, Louise, And that stuff is supposed to keep you from getting upset, and it never had the effect on me. I was always fantasizing over women and had nervous pimples and just always in bad shape. And the funny thing about that damn saltpeter, it just kicked in about 2 years ago. So never mind tonight either, Don. I'll be all right. Saturday Night Live comes on, huh? I'm glad to see a lot of old friends here that I've seen before, met before, and glad to see my old friend Carol Jean from years and years ago, and my special. This sounds terrible. It isn't the way it sounds, but I have a special groupie here named Debbie, who is my new favorite, and. Some people I sponsor, and some old friends from Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and a group here from Naples who I go to Naples every year in the fall with some other people, and we go to a lot of meetings there. So over here is one of the few chances I get to see the people from Naples. They're not at the meetings over there. Maybe they're meditating. I don't know. But this has really been a great thing. I did enjoy Patty's talk last night very much, and once she got over her spite and her spleen and her sorrow over being a Chippewa Indian, I'll tell you, she kind of got your sympathy with being a Chippewa Indian as though that were a poor childhood. We Norwegian Lutherans in northern Wisconsin we would be very hungry in the Depression. Sometimes all we could do is to go over and put our little nose up against the fence of the reservation and watch the Chippewa Indians eating their maize. And then I'd go home. I remember on my 7th birthday, just a tyke, and no cake at our house. My mother cut a picture of a cake out of a newspaper. All I remember about that day, I spent hours trying to blow out the candles. I'll tell you, I know they have this thing, adult children of alcoholics, where they learn to hate their parents, but I'll tell you, they should have a group called Adult Children of Norwegian Lutherans. I'll tell you. At least alcoholics pass out or leave, but Norwegian Lutherans just stay there. But it's a good meeting. And I'll tell you, I was most favorably impressed today. I hate to kind of go to meetings sometimes at conventions. I go always because I think you should show the flag. but I hate to go because there's always going to be some silly thing or a funny talk or something that has nothing to do with what I believe, really. And I sat in a room today, in this room right here, and for all three of the presentations, and I just loved every one of them. They were all good and down to earth. I very much enjoyed Dick's presentation this morning on sponsorship and a little bit of the history of AA. I thought, well, of course, I've known Dick for a long time. Maybe I'm prejudiced. And then our second meeting was Harriet, who gave just an excellent meeting on the primary, or on the home group, and interpolated chapter 5 a little bit and pointed out some of these things. And very interesting. We had a good participation. And this afternoon, Sam Smith gave an excellent presentation on the primary purpose of AA, which we all need to hear. And I really had a good day. I felt just as though somebody'd been pouring stuff in my tanks all day. Now, I get around AA a lot, maybe more than most, and I'm all over the country and some parts of the world. And I'll tell you, there isn't very many places anymore where you get a group of people who are interested in hearing about AA as it is. And that's what makes this such a wonderful weekend. There are people here who want to hear about AA as it is, who are not here to see what traditions they can bend, to see what steps are not applicable if you're a glue sniffer. It's, I don't judge. No. But if I judged, I'd judge them, I'll tell you. It's just pleasant. And who should be in AA? Someone, I guess that was one of our afternoon meetings, somebody said that. Wasn't that funny? What would Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob and those early pioneers thought as they sat around trying to lure a couple more people into their dreary little movement, that someday they'd have to try to somehow find a way to screen them so they could keep them out if they weren't really alcoholics. That's a funny thing about AA. We all almost go to our grave fighting the appellation alcoholic. And once you accept it, the worst thing you can say about someone is, I don't even believe that son of a bitch is an alcoholic. Yeah. Worse. Terrible. But I guess we are here tonight. I want to express my appreciation to the committee for putting this on. I hope it goes forever, and I'm sure there's enough people that when they learn that there's AA to be found here, this hotel won't be big enough to hold it. Because there's only one thing wrong, of course. If there were only some way that we could get to all the people who are in AA, but who are not yet have learned how good AA can be. The people who need the message aren't here. The people who are interested are here, and we're kind of pre-sold. It's nice to have to come bring our tanks. Okay, fill us one and fill us one. There's a lot of people out there with empty tanks, and there ain't no way to fill them. And it's too bad we can't get to them, but that's just part of the nature of living, I guess. It's part of the old program is that if you don't choose to accept some advice and do these things, we have a great editor in Alcoholics Anonymous. We sometimes worry about people who get off and get crazy and stop being an AA and effective and nutty. We have a great editor, a man named John Barleycorn, who comes around from time to time and sticks them in his sack and it goes away and they disappear. We have a self-cleansing mechanism here. If you stay goofy long enough, you get drunk. And it's a blessing for all of us. Because when you get that goofy, you got two chances. You can either change or you can drink. Because it goes right back to that old thing that Dr. Jung told Roland, 1931-32. That thing that said, I'm sorry, but you are what is known as an alcoholic. And to the best of my knowledge, there is no effective treatment for you in the world today. And that was in my lifetime. That's scary to me. I was a boy playing on the streets of Eau Claire, Wisconsin when that came out. And Of course, I had no idea. But old Roland was a little upset by this, of course, and the doctor went on to say, as far as I can see, you have just a couple alternatives. One, you will either have to keep yourself confined voluntarily or involuntarily as long as you live, or you must face the consequences that you will intermittently drink until you go mad or die. And that's kind of a dreary diagnosis, I would imagine, to be sitting there to hear. As I've said many times, if I'd have been in Roland's position, I would have said, Doctor, I want a second opinion. And I'm sure the doctor would have said, okay, you're homely too. I've had a bad run of luck all my life. But then he told him, of course, that there are some people, 1 in a million maybe, some alcoholics who have something called a spiritual experience, but there's no way to study for it, no way to get it, and it just seems to happen. And that seems to be the pattern for alcoholics. And yet, over the years, we've all seen something strange happen. We've seen hospitals where they say they can treat alcoholics for 7 days and recover them. And they have some successful examples. There are people who say 28-day program will keep people sober. And they have some successful examples. And there are psychiatrists who say, I've worked with alcoholics and I have a couple examples. And it makes you wonder, Jesus, is this correct? Is that correct? What's correct? And there's an operative term I finally found in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous that explains it to my satisfaction. It's used throughout the book. And I don't know about those people, but I know what Bill means when he says alcoholics of our type. Maybe alcoholics of their type can go to Schick-Shadel for 7 days and be cured. It wasn't very many years ago that Schick-Shadel advertised they could return alcoholics to social drinking. That was in my sobriety. In 1965, I was at a TV station in Hollywood, and this guy came through, and he was speaking. He was the director of the Schick-Shadel hospital that returned alcoholics to drinking. Now, I'll tell you, on a hot summer's day in Hollywood, and you see a guy giving a demonstration, and he talks about this and gets done and sips a martini. And he was a known alcoholic. And it's all done because they had overcome an imbalance of something in the system that caused alcoholism. And it was a pretty staggering demonstration. I was sober and I didn't even want to drink. And my tongue darted out. I couldn't believe it. Caught 3 flies in a gnat. But that's what they preached and advertised. And later that same month, I guess the guy's balance lost a little something because he went on a terrible drunk and wound up in a padded cell at Schick-Shadel. And they discontinued that program later that year. Now they cure them in 7 days. And they may do it. I'm not saying they're not. They don't. Because I know people who say, yes, I went through the Schick-Shadel program. Chet, my hat's off to you, my hair's off to you. I don't know what more I can do. But you can't do that if you're an alcoholic of what I think to be our type. Our type of alcoholic is manifested by as not an addiction to alcohol, nor a desire to have a few drinks. It's manifested by discovering that alcohol is more efficacious than any therapy I have ever found in the world to redress my emotional imbalances. I never thought of it that way. I don't recall ever drifting into a Rocky's Rockaway and say, Louis, I'd like to redress the emotional imbalance I feel. Scientists who have studied alcoholics say that they can get to an intensity of conflict where the level of intensity of conflict is so strong and that a diminishment must be made or the patient is in severe danger of going into psychosis. Now, whoever thinks about that when they drink? Yeah. I think the shorthand version of that is, I'll show that bitch. Somebody's pointing over here. Somebody must have just said that. Buck, was that you? Duke, did you say that, Duke? But, we don't ever stop and think about it. We just think, I need some relief. And it brings the relief. I was thinking about that. I met a girl here today at the pool. She said, I saw you last summer at Pearl Harbor. And I was talking at a meeting at Pearl Harbor at the Naval Hospital. I was brought over there to speak at the Naval Hospital for the anniversary of their alcohol facility, naval facility. And it brought back a tremendous memory, because that day was a very touching day. They had selected arbitrarily July 8th for this anniversary. Bill and Barbara, right, who are here with me today from Los Angeles, were with me over there. And July 8th, no big deal, except I got thinking about it beforehand. And I had a little something extra to add to my talk that day. I stood in this auditorium full of people ranging from admirals to seamen second, all in their summer uniforms looking slick. And I could look out the window and I could see the spot where I had my first drink 44 years before to the day. Now that's spooky. Now you think, how would you remember what day you had your first drink? Because I remember it because that day when I had my first drink, the next day was my 16th birthday. And I had my first hangover on that ship. I was turned 16, and this year, the next day, I turned 60. And in many ways, I felt much younger than I had in 1943 in Pearl Harbor. But what if that's the year you got sober? God, you make it tough on us newcomers. I'm talking about the old days when I was 15. Said, oh, shit, I got sober then. I wish you'd talk to that newcomer Eve and straighten her out. But I remember about that? I've said this many times, but it's the best way I know to describe it. Once upon a time, I used to do public relations for the central office in Los Angeles. I once used this phrase a couple of times in a Rotary meeting or a Kiwanis, and they just had no idea what the hell I was making the deal out of. But I noticed in any group of alcoholics, it's immediately understandable what the difference is in alcohol to me as opposed to people not like me, not of my type. That is this. I drank that drink because I wanted desperately to look like a man to the men on this ship. Because I was a small, skinny, pimply-faced, dumb little snot from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and I was on a fast track, I'll tell you. And I wanted so much to look like a man. And I'd try to drink and I'd throw it up all the way across the Pacific. And then when we were in Pearl, as they went on deck, as we came into Pearl Harbor, I took another drink of that cap, and it stayed down. I remember thinking, oh, if I could just do this and smile. And then it turned out, I had no idea of this, nor did anybody else ever have, I'm sure, that my body has an unusual response to alcohol. I had no idea it had an unusual response then or thereafter. But it turns out my body has an unusual response to alcohol. Most everybody, if you go to AA and you hear people talk, you will, no matter what they're saying, somewhere in there, they may not even know what they're saying. They talk about an unusual response to alcohol. A response that you don't know is unusual because you just take it for granted. You have no way to measure the response to alcohol. All you know is that as you grow up in the world, you find good things and bad things. You find you have to get a job eventually. Your folks won't carry you anymore. That's a bad thing. You find sex. That's fun. That's a good thing. You find sex brings children. That's a bad thing. You find a lot of good and bad things as you grow up. It's just part of growing up. And I discovered alcohol was a good thing. It had an unusual effect on me. I remember a few months ago listening to a very lovely movie star, 8 months getting her 8-year birthday cake. I've known her since she's been sober. But she talks about, now here's a beautiful, exquisite, lovely, seductive. She's in her 40s, and she looks about 22, and she's so talented, and she goes to the Las Vegas, makes $100,000 a week, she's a singer and dancer, and stars in the dramatic roles, and just beautiful. And she talks about how the reason she drank, because when she was sober, she felt unattractive and clumsy and awkward, and the studio insisted that she act differently, and she found out when she drank that it made her what they wanted her to be. And when she did that for the first time, she understood her father, who had also been a drinker. And then one day, it got out of control and almost cost her everything. But now she says what she's found about AA is that she's able to, from time to time, she's little by little learning to feel the way she should have felt all along. But the special effect is this. I didn't realize it, and it sounds almost the same, but it's the difference, I think, between alcoholics and non-alcoholics. I drank to look like a man. When that alcohol stayed in my body a few minutes, a new thing took place. I began to feel the way men look, which sounds like the same, but it's 180 degrees difference. And I had no idea at that time that men didn't feel as well as they look. I was feeling better than they were. You know, how did I know that? But that was great. And I used alcohol for that purpose for many, many years. Alcohol brought a change in my life. It had an unusual effect, but I never knew it was unusual. And I never met an alcoholic who knew it was unusual. All I knew is when I felt bad, alcohol filled certain psychic holes in me that nothing else ever did. It filled holes I didn't even know they were there till I filled them. But once I filled them, and the funny thing is, I never thought I was getting anything special. I thought I was being brought up to where they were all along. And this is the way I should be. When my holes are full, that's the way I should be. Because I'm a good conversationalist. I play with my children better. Incidentally, 3 or 4 years ago, Nightline did a special on adult children of alcoholics. And they sent a team out to my house. My oldest daughter at that time was 34 or 35. She was teaching at the University of New Mexico. And she was home, but she's articulate and bright, and they sat us down next to each other in our sofa, and they interviewed me, and then they interviewed her. And you're supposed to run the following Monday night. And I'll tell you, I have been mad at Gaddafi over the years for a number of reasons, but that day, that fool did something so terrible that it preempted Nightline. I'll never rest till I get him. I don't care for myself, it's my daughter. But about 3 months later, I was in Madison, Wisconsin at AA thing on the weekend, and my wife called up. She said, they're going to run it tonight, Friday night. They just called from New York. So I stayed awake that night, I'll tell you. And they had this half-hour program on, or hour, I guess. And they had a series of young or people in their 20s and 30s talking about their fathers and mothers. Yes, he drank, and it was just terrible. Good. And then they interviewed me as an example of a father who had been hurtful to his children. Yes, when I should have been with him, I was in the insane asylum. Just resting up. And my daughter never got on the air. They never used her clip. And I called her at home in New Mexico that same night. I said, Mary, they didn't get you on the air. What a tragedy. She says, of course they didn't. Didn't you watch the program? And I said, yes. She said, don't you know why? Don't you remember what I said? I said, my daddy was much more pleasant when he drank than when he was sober. That's what's called an alcoholic of our type. But I fills my holes. When my holes are filled, I just do better. And the only problem I've ever had, it's the same problem most of us have, I guess. I have an unfortunate proclivity to overfill my holes sometimes. Don't mean to, but I'm forced into it. And my body seems to have no runoff mechanism. And goes right to the electrical works. And then a new change takes place many times, and this change is not a beneficial one, and I have sometimes become what police and judges have described as bizarre. Now, there's nothing wrong with being bizarre when you're a kid. That's kind of fun, you know. Boy, did we have fun after the prom last night. Went over and peed in the hotel lobby. But as you get older, being bizarre is a handicap, I'll tell you. And it wasn't very many years before I was working against bizarredom, I'll tell you. And I went to AA. Was sent to my first meeting in 1949. I guess I was the youngest person by 10 years of that in the state. I guess someone told me later, it must have been longer in that meeting, because the meeting looked like God's waiting room. It just, waiting for some voice to boom out of eternity and say, next. And they talked to the beneficiaries of stopping drinking. And I went to AA off and on after that for years. And listened to the people talk about how if you're a real alcoholic, your problem is alcohol, and if you stop drinking, it gets better. And I realized then and thereafter that was not my case. And I raised the tattered flag that I have come to believe every one of us will carry in one degree or another till we die. We just have to make sure it doesn't lead us too far. It just says, what you say may be right, but my case is different. And that's all that is required to die from alcoholism. I see alcoholics die almost every day. Most of you don't have that opportunity. I mean literally die. I don't mean die figuratively. I mean where we say, put a blanket over him and get him out of here. Because they die. Not just where I am. Of course, I see them on Skid Row. You say, of course you're dying on Skid Row. But that's only 3% of the people who die. The other 97% of people are people like you and me, who do it on the installment plan, little by little, hidden away and afraid. But the reason I mention that is because our topic is sponsorship. And I'll tell you, I can't conceive. I have sometimes thought about this. Now I've been sponsoring people for a long time, and I've had some luck with sponsors. Missed some, got some. But I think to myself, what would I do if Clancy Imislund, circa 1958, came in with his superficial intellectual defiance and his toothless air and smelling bad and refusing to accept any guidance because that would indicate weakness? What would I do if he came in and said, help me? Or they said you should be my sponsor. Or what can you do for me? I've thought about that a lot. I don't know what the hell I would do for that guy. And I get some bad cases. People send people to me from Texas and Georgia. I mean, you better go out there. You're too sick for anybody decent, you son of a bitch. You know. And, you know, it hasn't happened recently, thank God, but a few years ago when I was in my full cry, I used to hear the doorbell ring at midnight and go to the door. There'd be some goof standing there. They said you'd help me. And I see across the park a car speeding away at top speed. I said, who was that guy? He wouldn't tell me his name. I'm almost ready to dust the guy for fingerprints, you know. But I don't know what I would do for such a supercilious, nasty, afraid, broken little puke. But apparently, my sponsor did. No more coffee for table 27. What is it? Right. My sponsor did, because somehow I asked him to be my sponsor. I had no illusion AA could work for me. I knew all about, I could quote the book better than most of the people that were around there. That's my stock in trade, reading fast and learning. And it's true, I was living in the back seat of an abandoned car in the AA club parking lot, because I knew this was a bad AA town when I got to Los Angeles. I went to this club and I said, I have no place to live. And you'd think a sponsor, or somebody would say, oh, don't you, son? We'll get a place for you. There's an old Mercury, 49 Mercury, down there in some tall grass at the end of the parking lot. Sleep in there. That's pretty cozy. So I decided to do it for a couple of days. I did it for months. It was just hideous. But I was there, and they said, as they said then, as they say now, get a sponsor, get a sponsor, get a sponsor. So I got a sponsor. This guy seemed to be a nice guy. I heard him talk, and he was pleasant and kindly. And his name was Bob Bailey. He was a character actor in the movies and seemed to be very nice, and asked to be my sponsor. And he was very, very opposite of what I thought. He was stern. He was strict with me. He was pleasant to others. He was stern with me. I'll tell you something. This is really true. I found out years later. He really didn't like me at all. And he was having me do things sometimes just to get out of sight. But one thing he did do for me, he intimidated me. And I hated him for intimidating me. But he could make me feel, and I blessed my lucky stars for that. I've always felt that's the luckiest break any new disturbed person can find, is a sponsor who intimidates them. Because you will do more for an intimidator than you will ever do for a chum. You know, do that! If a chum would have said to me, no, you called that woman a bitch. Go over and apologize to her. Why should I? Did you hear? To hell with her. But my sponsor said, you called that woman a bitch. Go over and apologize to her. Did you hear what she said to me? I don't care what she said to you. Go over and apologize. I'm sorry. Bitch. Terrible. Somewhere I did a lot of actions. He made me do things. You know, most of you know this old story. It's an old tragic piece of crap, but it's, you know, tells the whole story. When I was about a month sober, I was still living in that car. I was eating mostly cake at meetings. You can't imagine how sick you get of cake. You just let them eat bread and potatoes. And occasionally somebody would buy me a hamburger in this club. They had a little snack bar there, and I'd do some swamping sometimes get a hamburger. And I said to my sponsor one day, I said, Bob, you know, I really tried to do what's right. I'm living in that abandoned car, Bob. You know, I've had my picture in the New York Times. I have been successful in several places in the world. I used to be something, Bob, and I'm living in the backseat of an abandoned car. And it's cold at night, and I lay out there and get cold, and I'm hungry a lot of the time, and I can't live like an animal, Bob. Jesus, what am I going to do? I said, get a job. I said, get a job, for Christ's sake. Look how terrible I look. I said, get a terrible job. So I got a series of terrible jobs. They were hideous. I got fired as a dishwasher. Sure, Patty, she was successful as a dishwasher. Big deal. Don't fire her. She's a Chippewa. Fire the Lutheran. Fired as a janitor in a jewelry store. AA guy had a jewelry store, and he fired me on Christmas Eve. And he felt I was dusting too long amongst the watches. And that's a terrible thing to do to a newcomer, because I had visions of spending the new year in Seattle saying, see anything you like? Got fired as a furniture mover after 3 hours, because that was one of the days I was sensitive and I'd been feeling bad. And this guy said to me, you, without the glasses, without the teeth, you bumped my lamp. I said, no, you're mistaken, sir. I broke your goddamn lamp. You can't push sensitive, intelligent people. But the day I lost my job as a dishwasher, I was 6 months sober, still living in an abandoned car. And that day I decided, this is ridiculous. I've had some good feelings in these 6 months. I've gotten along a little bit. But it just doesn't work. And I decided to kill myself, because if you're 6 months sober, people around me seemed to came in around as I did, had jobs and families and coming. And I just felt like such a pariah all the time. And I decided to walk into the ocean a la A Star is Born. I've never lose my sense of drama. I don't mind losing my life, but let me do it dramatically. So I didn't know quite how to get to the ocean. I walked back Sunset down to La Cienega and over to Wilshire and turned right and walked. And if you're a goof like I am, I'm sure if you ever get into moods like this, you just know that people are going by you and saying, oh, what a terrible load that man must handle. Aren't we lucky we don't have, because you walk just like Hamlet on the battlements of Elsinore, just. And it's a good thing you don't really hear what they're really saying. Did you see that crazy asshole? But I walked and walked and walked, and I walked. I couldn't get to the ocean. I couldn't find the ocean. I stopped in a little filling station. I said, Jesus, how far is it to the ocean? He says, you're just in the western end of Beverly Hills, kid. You have to walk out past the Veterans Hospital, then about 5 more miles, and that's the beach. No, I don't think I'll do that. I don't mind dying, but I'm not going to. This is not a walkathon. So I was so desperate. I found myself. I'd walked into my sponsor's toll zone. The calls were only a dime there, and I called him up, and it was just crazy. I knew he'd be on me because he helped get this job as a dishwasher for me. And when he heard that I'd been fired, most of you know why I got fired, so I usually talk about it. But I was washing dishes. And I became aware that the busboys were bringing in more dishes than the waitresses were taking out. And I deduced that probably they were getting dishes from other area restaurants to humiliate me because I was an Anglo. Well, it turned out I miscounted, but I got fired anyway. I didn't do the dishes. But I called, I said, how am I going to tell him? And I thought, I'm a good writer. I have been a good writer. I'll tell him the saddest story he's ever heard. I'll just think of a story that'll just touch him, because can't ever reason with the old fool. I call up, hello, Bob, this is Clancy. Why aren't you working? Never mind, Bob. Let me tell you, Bob, something. I don't know if you know this or not, but I've lost my family and I've lost everything I had, and I used to be something, you know all that. But there's something I don't think you know, Bob. Even in AA, you don't see this because you're not around, but there's something about me that makes people in AA treat me differently than they treat each other. I would sit down and have a cup of coffee with somebody after a meeting, and they find a reason to get up and go and talk and sit with somebody else. People go out after meetings, go do someplace, and nobody ever asked me. There's something different about me, Bob. Even when I try to go to meetings every night, I never get called on in the participation meetings. I'm never asked to lead a meeting, to chair it, to read anything. There's something terribly different about me, Bob, and I don't know what it is, but I can't make it here. And it suddenly struck me, this is true. I burst into tears. It didn't make him feel bad, but it hurt my feelings good. I said, what am I going to do, Bob? What am I going to do? He said, why don't you write your goddamn inventory the way I told you? And that made me just crazy, because I had just explained to him the week before that I've taken my inventory with a psychiatrist. That's not the problem. I don't need to go over that crap again. I got to get somewhere to get out of there. And I said, write my inventory? Why don't you? I forget what it was now, but it had been fun to watch him try it. And I said, Bob, in my judgment, that's the last thing in the world I need. God, I'd go over that crap again and I feel so bad. In my judgment, that'd kill me. He said, in your judgment? Who cares about your judgment? You live in a goddamn abandoned car. He says, if I wanted your judgment, I'd come down and put my head in the back window and ask you for it. I'm living in a big house in Beverly Hills or Pacific Palisades. I don't care about your judgment. You got to surrender your judgment. That's what it's all about. And he cursed me and hollered at me. I got so upset, I came out of that. Thank God I turned towards town. I'd have made the ocean in 2 bounds, boy. And I was back and I said, give me some paper. I'm going to write my goddamn inventory. And I was so upset, I put in things in which I wasn't the hero. A terrible thing. I got all done. I had pages of just filth. And I'll certainly never read this to anybody, I'll tell you that. But I put it under the seat of my car. And about a week later, I felt bad again. And he said, when are you going to read your inventory? And I was still intimidated. I remember standing in meetings and thinking, when he comes in and said, hey, Clancy, I'm going to say, what, Bob? I thought of that, and I'd be standing there thinking, and he'd say, hey, Clancy! I hated him for that. I've lain awake and just taken skin off his bones. And you want to feel what a hot pliers feels like on your fingernails, Bob? But that day, and then a week later, he rowed me along the ocean to Oxnard, and he gave me a flashlight. He had some cockamamie concept. It's easier to tell your inventory if you're not looking him right in the face. So it was dark, and I read it. I hated it. I started, as everybody that ever took an inventory does. Now, let me explain this part. You see, it really isn't the way it sounds. Just shut up and read the goddamn thing. And we got near Oxnard, and I had just finished some terrible things. I looked over toward him, and he was going... And I thought, I've made this old man snap. He's going to die. Now, I've made that trip maybe 250 times since then, on the driver's side. And I'm a much better listener than my sponsor ever was. I always turn my head when I yawn. Because after you've heard inventories a while, they're all the same. They really are almost tedious. For 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, I've been thinking, I wish this guy would have something different. Just maybe a GNU or something, just to add a fillip. But there's never anything new. Because inventories, humans can only do so much. In fact, after you hear enough of them, you can tell when something's left out. You can say, did you leave something out there, Bill? Have you been talking to that bitch? No, but that's what comes next in that pattern. And I look back on that day as one of the great turning spots of my life. Not because I had any great relief. I took that inventory, I didn't feel any better. I went back and slept all night in an abandoned car, got up hungry, thought, oh, what next? But I look back at that because that's the day that I think is the most important day of my life. I took the third step. I apparently took the fourth step, but I took the third step. I surrendered my will voluntarily to a care of a power greater than myself. And he was my higher power. Because I'd been raised as something else. I was raised in a very, very religious family, and later on psychiatry I discovered I was religiously repressed, and that made me sad. I could tell you about psychological scarring that would bring tears rolling down your cheeks, but I don't want to ruin your fun. But I knew this, that by the time I was grown up, I knew if God existed, I was going to hell. I could not conceive God. I hated one of the things I had trouble in AA. You can go to AA meetings and talk about things, but sooner or later somebody brings up this God crap. And if it's got to be that kind of thing, I can't do it. It just seems like you could sit and talk to me and say, I'm staying so for a little while, and afterwards some old lady comes and says, oh, Sonny, I heard you talk. We just hate to see you fight God. And it's just all I could do to keep from saying, well, ma'am, you'll never see me fight God again. Now you can just hear me fight God. And when I was about 3 months sober, we talked about that. I can't go for that second and third step. That may work for some people, but not for intellectuals. He said, don't you believe in God? And I said, no. He said, you believe in AA? I said, no. He says, you think I'm doing better than you are? I said, I guess you are. He says, congratulations, I'm your new higher power. And I told people about that. They said, you can't have a human being as your higher power. Let me tell you something, folks. You can have whatever you believe in to be your higher power. A lot of people have died because they didn't want to admit that they didn't believe in God, or didn't have faith in God's goodwill. I would rather see any newcomer have a hand, an arm he believed in to hang on and say, this is my higher power, than to pretend to believe in an abstraction that he doesn't. Because eventually it gets to be 2 o'clock in the morning and you've got to turn to what you believe, and if you've been shucking them, you're dead. You better have something you can believe. And I did things, he was my higher power. That sounds silly, but he was. I did things, I'd work to please him. I didn't hate him all the time. When he gave me a pat in the back, it was better than a 10 grand a year raise in an advertising agency. Didn't last very long, but wonderful. And little by little went like this, and I stayed sober. And I did things, and I wrote an inventory. And again, something else. One of the things something that Patty said last night reminded me about this. One of the things in my inventory I hated my father. I was an only child, and he had left my mother and I when we were small, and although he was very religious, and he married another woman, and I loved him so much, and I never seemed to be able to please him, and I always felt he was a big ogre putting me down, and I hated him, and about almost the last time I talked to him was when I was in jail one morning, and my father came out of the jail cell. He said, "Did you have a good time last night, son?" I thought, what the hell is he doing down here? And I said, "No, Dad, I'll be out of here soon. It's going to be I'll do better, Dad." He says, "I hope you'll do better, because last night while you were out drunk, you let your little son die at home." He said, I don't ever want to be around you again. You make me sick." That was the end of my father and my son, all in one day. And I talk about drinking. I remember that. We talk about swearing off with a solemn oath. 2 days later, I was so guilt-ridden that in Wisconsin, in the wintertime, when someone dies, they don't bury him because the ground is frozen. They put him in a mausoleum, and then in the springtime, they dig a grave. So they were taking this little casket out to the mausoleum, and there were a couple guys from the funeral parlor were going to take it. I said, "I'll take the damn thing." And I carried that little grave casket into the mausoleum, and I put my hand on it, and I said, "John, I will never drink again. I will never do this again. John," tears rolled on my cheeks. And a month later, I was face down in my own vomit and 400 miles away drunk. Had no idea that being so sad about my son's grave made it necessary for me to drink. Who would know that? Until later, when you don't need it. But my father and I didn't talk for years. When I did get successful, I stayed away from him. And I was all over the country working, and my mother and I'd correspond with her, and she'd send me Bible verse. She was a little Irish lady, and she meant well, but she didn't know what to make of a bizarre person like me. And my sponsor went down my inventory. He says, "Now you're going to have to write a letter of amends to your father." I said, "Write a letter of amends to my father? He just about killed me. He's ruined my life, and he's ruined my mother's life, and he's ruined everything." He said, "You were a terrible son. He may have been a rotten father, but you were a terrible son. Write him a letter of amends. And I want to see it before you mail it." He knows. And I wrote a letter, and I showed it to him, and he X'd out some of the accusations I'd made. And I sent it. And my dad sent a letter back and said, "I hope you're all right, because wish you well." And I was going to let it go with that. I've done what I have to do for that old son of a bitch. And my sponsor made him write me a letter. And in about a year or two, my father and his wife were coming through Los Angeles. I had a little apartment by this time. And they stopped in and saw me. And I was surprised. My father was not a big, threatening ogre. He was a little guy about this big, with gray hair. As I talked to him, I realized he felt worse about me than I ever felt about me. He felt sad that he had done something bad. And little by little, we got to be quite close. It's an odd thing. We spent over 20 years, probably among the closest father and son relationships I've ever known. His declining days, he came out and lived in my house in Los Angeles. We had a great time. When he got so old and sick, he went back to Eau Claire. I sat by his grave, or sat by his bed while he died, and held his hand. And the next day, or a couple days later, at the funeral in our Savior's Lutheran Church, I remember sitting next to his casket and feeling so good he was out of his pain. Never felt sad once about him dying, because he had felt so sick. And I was thinking, isn't that amazing? I'm looking around our Savior's Lutheran Church. I know God is here, a loving God. My dad is here, a loving dad. And none of this would have been possible if my sponsor hadn't intimidated me. You know, that's a funny little thing. And little by little that happened. In the course of these actions, I survived. In the course of those actions, I eventually discovered what was wrong with me. I didn't at first. That's one of the hardest parts about AA when you come here. We want people to learn what to do. We want to give them data and information. And you go to meetings and you just hear information. People tell you things, and here's a letter, and here's, remember this, and tonight we're... And you get pieces of information that, hey, that sounds pretty good, I'm going to keep that. Then you get another piece of information, but it doesn't fit the first piece of information. It's like a jigsaw that no pieces ever fit together. Here's another piece, and then the guy said that. And, Christ, you got a whole board full of pieces that don't fit anything. Just try to remember them all individually. And one day you get a piece that two pieces fit into. And another piece, oh, why, it's a horsey. I can put that baby together. But the problem is to hang on till you see what it is. And that's why I think actions are so important. At the end of the year, by the end of the year, I knew I felt I was an alcoholic. Most of you know this old story, because I've said it so many times, but to finally I could understand the nature of my emotions now, and why I had to act differently and why to do things. But I still could not really understand what is this special effect of alcohol if you're an alcoholic. God damn it, every drink I took didn't make me crazy. I didn't take a sip of beer and go out and rape nuns like some of these bizarre speakers you hear. I didn't do anything. I had some bad luck sometimes, but sometimes I had a good time. In fact, when you stop and think about it, the mark of the drinker, progressive drinker, is like you play Russian roulette every time out. That's what's hard to remember. And when you start, you got a lot of empty chambers. Click, ha 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 ha. Click, ha ha ha. Boom. Jesus, I have to watch that one. Click. By the time you get to the end, there's an empty in there somewhere. Boom. Boom. I'll hear that click sooner or later. Boom. But I don't get crazy on drinking. I had a lot of problems drinking. I've got all these things. But what is it that makes me an alcoholic? I cannot quite get that together. I know about the emotions, but these things you say, guys stayed drunk 20 years, that's an alcoholic, not a guy like me. And as most of you know, I was a year sober. I was finally got a little job in an advertising agency. Not a very good one. I was working wrapping packages in the back, the same kind of job I'd had when I was 14. You know, this was the AA rocket to stardom. Like, it makes me think of Cape Canaveral, not Cape Kennedy. They got successes, but my successes were like the Cape Canaveral rockets. 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, shit. You know, I was working there, and one of our accounts was something called Kamchatka vodka. And it's a well-known vodka on the West Coast. And they had the same billboard year after year. It said, vodka is pronounced Kamchatka, and in colors. And I thought, these people somehow have got to understand that I'm a brilliant guy. I look terrible. I got old clothes, used clothes. I had some clothes in the Salvation Army thrift store by that time, and I had no front teeth. But I thought, I'm going to let them know that there's a brilliant guy here, and maybe they're going to say, hey, did you hear that kid's idea? Let's look into him. So I came by and they were laying out this board one more time, the art director, copywriter, account executive, and I came by with my packages. And I timed it just right. I said, it's none of my business really, but just for a thought, how about this for a slogan? Kamchatka vodka goes boom. Better than all vodkas anywhere. And I looked around, and I got the same looks I've been getting all my life, just... And this one guy said, you know, you don't wrap packages well, but that's your job. Why don't you do that and left the copywriting to us? And the art director, whose name, incidentally, is Sam Diamond, because he is on my list of people to get. It's only been 29 years, but I've still got him fresh. He said, you know, you have a reputation for being a smart mouth, and if my mouth looked like yours, I wouldn't open it much. And Anna, I'm so upset, I'm just crazed. Because, you know, there's nothing in the world when you're insecure worse than public humiliation. If you have a gun, you'd shoot somebody just for a moment. And I was going to jump the table and smash him in the face. I thought, no, I'll never explain that to my sponsor. So I just took my package and I didn't know why I didn't quit or run away, because I felt as bad as I ever felt. I was just about a year sober. And that night I saw my sponsor, and I wanted, at the meeting, I knew I'd see him, I wanted to tell him, because this time he had to be on my side. I said, Bob! He said, shut up, for Christ's sake. If you can't be a man, try to act like one. He says, now tell me what happened. I told him this whole story. I said, you know, when they just ridiculed me, Bob. I don't care if they accepted it, but It was a good idea. It's a nice, catchy slogan. It meant something, and they just laughed at me because I'm nothing. I'll never be anything, Bob. And they just turned it. It's just terrible. He said, "Oh, you're such a goof. Don't you ever listen to what I tell you? You've been hearing it around this AA for a year now. Get this through your head. Those people aren't putting you down. They're not ridiculing you. They don't know what the hell you're talking about. Can't you understand this? Kamchatka vodka doesn't go boom to them. To them, Kamchatka vodka goes blah. That's why you're in this goddamn meeting and they're not." "Oh," I said, "I could have told you that." He used to put his finger under my nose and go like that. That's the only time I really missed my front teeth. I just... But I wasn't going to give him the pleasure of gumming it, I'll tell you that. But you might think about that sometimes. You might even explain that sometimes to new people you're sponsoring or members yourself. People come here and say, "I'm not sure I'm an alcoholic. I haven't been in jail 100 times. I'm not sure I'm an alcoholic. I've been in the nut house. Maybe I'm not really an alcoholic." I'll bet you there isn't a person like you and me who could ever stand to be a social drinker. Can you imagine what a terrible life that must be for people? Have your back to the wall, hounds of fate ripping at your throat. Take a drink. "Oh, God, I can't." And have it go. No more of that for me. I've got to sift things out. They just think 93 or 94% of people in the world, drinkers, will never know what you and I just take for granted. When your back's to the wall and the hounds of fate are ripping at your throat, it doesn't go blah. It goes boom. Bring on your goddamn hound, Mrs. Baskerville. But the one bad effect, and let me tell you something else. That effect, oddly enough, the one other problem we have in AA is coming to understand it happens at different times to different people. The early AAs, the old guys, most of them were people who'd grown up, had some kind of a life, gradually drank themselves over the edge into this special effect. And they are the people who, in our book, exhorts to, you may return to normal living. They have some benchmarks back there that they once were in. But it's the line that's crossed. Sometimes you drink 5 years to cross that line. Sometimes 30 years. Sometimes young people cross it right away, as I did. But that's why we have this paradox in AA. Some old fool gets up and says, "I drank for 35 years. And looks accusingly at some little snot that's not even 35 years old, as if to say, "How can you be an alcoholic, you little snot? I drank longer than you've been alive." And what he doesn't know is the little snot is sitting there thinking, "You can't be much of an alcoholic if you lasted 35 years, you old son of a bitch." You know? It turns out it isn't how long you drank or whether you went to the nut house. It's if it redresses the emotional imbalances. The nature of alcoholism is an intolerable sobriety coupled with alcohol that makes it better, and eventually alcohol gets bad. And yet you want to stop, and you discover stopping drinking doesn't make it better. Probably the greatest... I've read nearly all of the major treatises starting in 1959 about alcoholism. Or a lot. I don't much anymore, but I used to for years. It's kind of a hobby. But I've never read a better description of alcoholism than there is in that one line in chapter 3. What do we all have in common? You may wonder that if you're here tonight. You look around. What do we got in common? Some people drank for years, some didn't. Some went to jail, some didn't. There's blacks and whites and Orientals in AA meetings, and Gentiles and Jews and all kinds of Arabs and everything in AA. And they all have different stories. What the hell do we have in common? I'll tell you what we have in common. Something that Bill Wilson, at 3 years sober, observed and wrote down, and I had to believe was inspired because he couldn't possibly have known enough to write it. He wrote, the great obsession we have. All of us have shared, doesn't say it in this quite these words, but all of us have shared one thing, this great obsession. We must believe it and accept it. The obsession that somehow, someday, I will control and enjoy my drinking. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing, Bill wrote. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity and death. And people can't understand that. Why do they do that? Why do they do that? They don't realize that I must believe I can control my drinking because life without it is intolerable. And it's hard to, sometimes we have to remind our newcomers that stopping drinking isn't what makes you better. It makes it worse. The natural state of sober alcoholics is anxiety and tension and depression. And it gets worse and worse. And that's what AA is about. AA is not designed to make you wonderful or holy or good.